Captain Sarah Chen stepped off the transport shuttle and onto the polished metal floor of the NIGMA Empire's capital station. The massive structure hung in space like a silver city, stretching for miles in every direction. Lights twinkled from thousands of windows, and ships of every size moved in carefully organized patterns around the station's docking arms. Sarah had trained for this moment for 2 years. She was Earth's first official ambassador to the galactic community, carrying humanity's hopes for peaceful contact with the stars. Her small diplomatic team followed behind her, their simple blue uniforms looking plain next to the elaborate clothing of the aliens moving through the station's corridors. The NIGMA Empire controlled most of this part of the galaxy. They had been the dominant power for over 1,000 years, ruling hundreds of worlds and dozens of different alien species. When Earth's first deep space probe had been detected at the edge of their territory, the Empire had sent a message inviting humanity to send representatives for formal contact. Sarah thought it was a good sign. Maybe the galaxy really was ready for peace. A tall, thin alien with purple skin and 4 arms approached their group. Its eyes were large and golden, and when it spoke, the words came out in perfect English through a translation device attached to its throat. "Welcome, humans," the alien said with what might have been a smile. "I am Diplomatic Aide Mordek. The High Council is waiting for you." They walked through corridors filled with beings Sarah had never imagined. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange she had to remind herself not to stare. There were creatures made of what looked like living crystal, others that seemed to be mostly tentacles, and several species that glowed with their own inner light. The meeting chamber was enormous. A circular table sat in the center, surrounded by dozens of seats designed for different types of bodies. At the head of the table sat Supreme Chancellor Vexithara, the leader of the NIGMA Empire. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her eyes were completely black, and when she looked at Sarah, the human felt like she was being examined by a scientist studying an interesting bug. "So," Vexithara said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber, "these are the humans. How quaint." Several other council members made sounds that the translation device interpreted as laughter. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but she felt her team tense behind her. "Thank you for receiving us, Chancellor," Sarah said, stepping forward. "Earth is honored to make contact with the NIGMA Empire. We come seeking peaceful relations and mutual understanding." "Of course you do," said another council member, a large creature covered in what looked like blue fur. "All primitive species want peace when they first discover they are not alone in the galaxy." "We have reviewed your species' technology," Vexithara continued. "Your ships are adequate for local travel. Your weapons are simple. Your planets are few. Tell me, Captain Chen, what exactly does humanity have to offer the NIGMA Empire?" Sarah had expected this question. Earth's leaders had spent months preparing her answer. "We offer friendship," she said simply. "We offer trade, cultural exchange, and cooperation. Humanity may be new to space, but we have survived and prospered on one of the most dangerous worlds in this region of the galaxy. We have learned to work together to solve problems and to never give up when things become difficult." More of that translated laughter echoed through the chamber. "How charming," Vexithara said. "You speak of your world as if it were special. We have seen the data. Earth is a simple Class M planet with normal gravity and acceptable atmosphere. Hardly unique." Sarah felt a flash of irritation but kept her voice steady. "With respect, Chancellor, I don't think your data tells the whole story. Earth has ice ages that last for thousands of years, volcanic eruptions that can change the climate of the entire planet, storms that can level cities, earthquakes that can split continents. Life on Earth doesn't just survive. It fights for every single day of existence. And yet you claim to be peaceful," observed a council member with too many eyes. "We are peaceful," Sarah replied. "But that doesn't mean we're helpless. We've learned that sometimes the only way to protect peace is to be ready for war. That's why I'm here to establish clear boundaries for human space." She activated a holographic display that showed the local star map. Red lines marked the borders of human territory, a small cluster of systems that looked tiny compared to the vast green area controlled by the NIGMA Empire. "These are our worlds," Sarah said. "We ask that they be respected. We're willing to discuss trade routes, diplomatic exchanges, and cooperation on scientific projects. But these systems are ours, and we will defend them." The silence that followed was not comfortable. Finally, Vexithara spoke, and this time there was no attempt to hide her amusement. "You will defend them?" she asked. "With what?" "We have seen your ships, Captain Chen. They are barely capable of traveling between stars. We have weapons that could turn your entire homeworld to glass in minutes. We have fleets that number in the thousands." "I'm sure you do," Sarah said quietly. "But I want to be very clear about something. Humanity survived because we learned never to start fights but always to finish them. We learned that the biggest predator isn't always the smartest one. We learned that sometimes the small creature with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous one in the room." She leaned forward, slightly, meeting Vexithara's black eyes directly. "We're asking for peaceful coexistence. We're offering friendship and cooperation. But if you mistake our desire for peace as weakness, if you ignore the boundaries we've established, you'll discover why our species is still alive after millions of years on a world that tried every single day to kill us." The chamber fell completely silent. Sarah could hear the soft hum of the station's air recyclers and the distant sound of ships moving outside. Then Vexithara began to laugh. It was a sound like silver bells, beautiful and cold. "Such dramatic words from such a small species," she said. "Very well, Captain Chen. We acknowledge your request for boundaries. The NIGMA Empire will consider your proposal for peaceful relations." Sarah knew a dismissal when she heard one. She straightened and gave a formal bow. "Thank you for your time, Chancellor. I hope our next meeting will be under equally peaceful circumstances." As they were escorted back to their shuttle, Diplomatic Aide Mordek walked beside Sarah. "You spoke boldly to the Council," he said quietly. "Perhaps too boldly." "Sometimes bold words prevent the need for bold actions," Sarah replied. "And sometimes they guarantee them," Mordek said. "The NIGMA Empire has absorbed 437 different species into our civilization. All of them spoke boldly at first." Sarah stopped walking and looked at the alien. "How many of those species came from death worlds?" Mordek's golden eyes blinked slowly. "Death worlds? Worlds where the planet itself tries to kill everything that lives on it. Where species evolve not just to survive, but to fight back against extinction every single day. Where cooperation isn't just helpful, it's the only way to live." I do not know," Mordek admitted. "That's the difference," Sarah said softly. "We do." The shuttle carrying the human delegation departed the NIGMA station 30 minutes later. As they flew back toward the edge of Empire space, Sarah stared out at the stars and hoped her words had been clear enough. Behind them in the High Council chamber, Supreme Chancellor Vexithara was already making plans. 3 months after Captain Chen's warning, the first NIGMA survey ships appeared at the edge of human space. Commander Jake Morrison was having his morning coffee on the bridge of the patrol ship UES Vigilant when his sensor officer called out the contact. The ship was small by military standards, designed for long-range patrols and peaceful contact with other vessels. Morrison had been hoping for a quiet patrol rotation. "Sir, we have 3 unknown contacts dropping out of hyperspace," Ensign Park reported. "They're big, Commander. Much bigger than anything in our files." Morrison set down his coffee and moved to the tactical display. 3 massive ships hung in space about 50,000 kilometers away. They were sleek and beautiful, covered in smooth curves and glowing sections that pulsed with soft blue light. Each one was at least 5 times the size of the Vigilant. "Send standard greeting protocol," Morrison ordered. "Let them know they're in human space and ask for their intentions." The response came quickly, but it wasn't what Morrison expected. "Human vessel." The translated voice was crisp and efficient. "You are ordered to maintain distance and not interfere with NIGMA Empire operations. We are conducting a routine survey of this system." Morrison felt his jaw tighten. The patrol briefings, had been very clear about this possibility. NIGMA vessels. This is Commander Morrison of the United Earthship Vigilant. This system is within established human territory. By interstellar law, you need permission from Earth authorities to conduct surveys here. Human Commander, the alien voice replied, and Morrison could hear amusement in it. The NIGMA Empire does not recognize primitive territorial claims. Continue on your patrol route and do not interfere. Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew of 28 men and women were watching him carefully. They all knew what Captain Chen had said at the diplomatic meeting. The recordings had been played at every military briefing for the past 3 months. Signal Earth Command, Morrison told his communications officer. Full diplomatic protest. Then set course to escort these ships out of our space. Sir, his tactical officer said quietly. They outgun us by about 50 to 1. I know, Lieutenant Rodriguez, but sometimes it's not about the size of your guns. The Vigilant moved closer to the NIGMA ships, taking position directly between them and the inner system. Morrison opened a channel again. NIGMA vessels, I'm requesting that you leave this system immediately. If you need to conduct legitimate scientific surveys, please contact Earth Diplomatic Services to arrange proper permissions. Human, the alien voice was no longer amused. You are beginning to annoy us. Move away or we will move you. Morrison smiled grimly. I'd like to see you try. For the next 6 hours, the Vigilant shadowed the NIGMA survey ships wherever they went. When they tried to approach the system's inhabited planet, Morrison put his ship directly in their path. When they moved toward the asteroid mining stations, the Vigilant was there first. When they attempted to scan the outer defense platforms, Morrison's ship blocked their sensors. The aliens never fired a shot, but Morrison could tell they were getting frustrated. Finally, the lead NIGMA ship opened communications one last time. Human, Commander, this is Fleet Surveyor Kextel. You are being extremely foolish. These are NIGMA Empire systems now. Your government will be informed. Actually, Morrison replied cheerfully, this is human space, and it's going to stay that way. Have a safe trip home. The 3 NIGMA ships jumped back into hyperspace 20 minutes later. Morrison's report reached Earth Command within hours, and from there it went directly to the Global Defense Council. Admiral Patricia Wells read it twice before calling an emergency meeting. They're testing us, she told the assembled military leaders. Captain Chen's warning didn't scare them off. They're probing to see how serious we are about defending our territory. What's our response? Asked General Martinez, head of the Space Marine Corps. We follow the protocol, Admiral Wells said grimly. All outer colonies go to alert status yellow. All patrol ships are reinforced with Marine detachments. And we send a very clear message back to the NIGMA Empire. The message was delivered by Captain Chen herself, broadcasting from Earth to the NIGMA capital. Chancellor Vex Thara, she said, looking directly into the camera. Your survey ships have violated human space. This is your second warning. Any further violations will be considered acts of aggression, and humanity will respond accordingly. On the NIGMA capital station, Supreme Chancellor Vexathara watched the humans' message with her senior military advisors. When it ended, she turned to Admiral Zeknor, commander of the 7th Fleet. What do you make of this threat, Admiral? Zeknor was a professional soldier who had conquered 15 systems for the Empire. He studied the tactical reports from the survey mission with the eye of someone who had fought hundreds of battles. They're brave, I'll give them that, he said finally. But courage without strength is just another word for stupidity. One human patrol ship shadowed 3 of our survey vessels for 6 hours. They never powered weapons, never made any real threat. They're trying to bluff with nothing in their hand. Your recommendation? Standard pacification protocol, Zeknor said without hesitation. We move in with overwhelming force, demonstrate our superiority, and demand submission. Once they see what real military power looks like, they'll surrender immediately. Most species do. Vexathera nodded slowly. The NIGMA Empire had used the same approach for centuries. It was efficient, relatively bloodless, and it worked. Very well. Take the 7th Fleet and begin operations against human colonies. Start with something small and isolated. Show them what resistance costs. What about prisoners? Zeknor asked. The usual. Relocate the ones who can't work. Keep the useful ones as laborers. The humans seem intelligent enough to be trainable. Within days, the NIGMA 7th Fleet was moving toward human space. 47 ships, including 12 massive dreadnoughts that could level continents. It was enough firepower to destroy every human ship and orbital station 3 times over. Admiral Zeknor had done this many times before. He expected the operation to take less than a week. On Earth, the Global Defense Council watched the approaching fleet and began implementing protocols that had been planned in secret for over 50 years. Across human space, civilian transports began moving children and non-combatants away from frontier colonies. Military reserves were activated. Weapons that had been stored in carefully hidden locations were distributed to civilian populations. General Martinez stood in the command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching status reports from across human space. Every colony, every space station, every mining outpost was reporting ready. They think we're just another primitive species, he said to Admiral Wells. They have no idea what they're walking into. Maybe that's for the best, Wells replied, quietly. Sometimes it's better when the enemy doesn't know what hit them. The NIGMA 7th Fleet reached the outer edge of human space and began scanning for suitable targets. Admiral Zeknor selected a small agricultural colony called Kepler 442b. Population 50,000, minimal defenses, perfect for making an example. As his fleet moved toward the planet, Zeknor reviewed the standard terms of surrender he would offer the humans. Join the Empire peacefully. Accept relocation and work assignments, and no one would be harmed. It was a generous offer. Most species were grateful for it. Admiral Zeknor had no way of knowing that every human on Kepler 442b was descended from farmers who had volunteered to colonize a world where the seasons lasted 3 years each, where storms could strip the atmosphere from entire continents, and where growing food required fighting the planet itself every single day. He was about to learn the difference between settling a garden world and taming a piece of hell. The battle for Kepler 442b would begin in 18 hours. The NIGMA 7th Fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Kepler 442b, just as the planet's 3-month-long dawn was beginning. Admiral Zeknor stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the world slowly rotate below them. It looked peaceful enough. Green continents, blue oceans, white clouds swirling in normal weather patterns. Begin standard approach, he ordered. Signal the planet and demand immediate surrender. The response came within minutes, transmitted from the colony's main settlement. NIGMA Fleet, this is Governor Sarah Mitchell of Kepler 442b Colony. We have received your ultimatum. We request 72 hours to evacuate non-combatant personnel. Zeknor blinked his 4 eyes in surprise. Usually primitive species either surrendered immediately or made dramatic speeches about dying before submitting. He had never heard anyone calmly request time to evacuate civilians. You may have 48 hours, he replied, feeling generous. After that, any remaining humans will be considered hostile. Understood. Thank you for your consideration. The transmission ended, and Zeknor settled back to wait. He used the time to study detailed scans of the planet below. The colony was spread across a continent roughly the size of Australia back on Earth. Most of the settlements looked like typical farming communities, small towns connected by roads, surrounded by agricultural fields and processing facilities. What puzzled him was the population count. His sensors showed almost exactly 50,000 humans on the planet, but the evacuation ships leaving the surface only seemed to be carrying about 20,000 people. Perhaps their ships are smaller than we estimated, suggested his tactical officer. Perhaps, Zeknor agreed, but something felt wrong. On the planet below, Governor Mitchell stood in the colony's emergency command center, watching the last evacuation ship disappear into the atmosphere. Every child under 16 was safely away, along with everyone over 60 and anyone with medical conditions that would interfere with combat operations. That left 30,000 colonists who had volunteered to stay behind. Mitchell herself was a veteran of the Syrian conflict and the water wars that had plagued Earth in the 2090s. When she'd retired from the military and accepted the position of colonial governor, she thought her fighting days were over. She was wrong. All evacuation ships are clear, reported her communication officer. The aliens are asking if we're ready to surrender. Tell them we'll need the full 72 hours, Mitchell replied. That should give us time to finish preparations. What Admiral Zeknor couldn't see from orbit was what the colonists were actually doing. With their extra time, every piece of farm equipment on the planet was being converted into something else. Tractors became mobile weapon platforms. Irrigation systems became tunnel networks. Grain silos became fortified bunkers. The humans had learned something important. During their centuries of warfare on Earth, the difference between soldiers and warriors. Soldiers followed orders and used standard tactics. Warriors adapted, improvised, and used whatever was available to survive. Every human on Kepler 442b was a warrior. Marcus Webb had been a Marine sergeant during the Martian Independence War before, becoming a farmer on Kepler 442b. Now he stood in what used to be a wheat processing plant, watching his neighbors turn agricultural chemicals into improvised explosives. Remember, he told the group, we're not trying to win a conventional battle. We're trying to make them pay such a high cost that they decide we're not worth the trouble. An older woman named Chen, no relation to Captain Sarah Chen, looked up from the fertilizer bomb she was assembling. She had been a chemical engineer before retiring to farm. How long do we need to hold out? She asked. Earth Command says relief. Forces are already moving, Webb replied. But they're 3 weeks away. We need to survive that long. Against 47 ships? Webb smiled grimly. They'll never get all 47 ships down here. And the ones that do land are going to discover that we've had 3 months to prepare for them. When the 72-hour deadline expired, Admiral Zeknor opened communications with the planet one final time. Humans of Kepler 442b, your time has expired. Surrender now and accept relocation, or face the consequences. Governor Mitchell's response was broadcast from speakers across the entire colony. Admiral, this is Governor Mitchell. We respectfully decline your offer. Kepler 442b is our home, and we intend to keep it that way. Zeknor sighed. He had hoped the humans would be reasonable. Very well. Begin landing operations. The first wave of NIGMA forces hit the planet 6 hours later. 3,000 elite soldiers in advanced combat armor, supported by heavy weapons and air cover. They landed outside the colony's main town and began their advance, expecting to face desperate farmers with hunting rifles. Instead, they walked into carefully prepared kill zones. The attack began when the lead NIGMA unit crossed what looked like an ordinary irrigation ditch. The ditch exploded, taking out half the squad in a blast of improvised explosives and shrapnel made from farming tools. As the survivors tried to regroup, human snipers opened fire from positions hidden in grain silos 2 kilometers away. What followed was unlike anything in Admiral Zeknor's experience. The humans didn't fight like any military force he had ever encountered. They used no standard tactics, followed no conventional strategies. Instead, they fought like wild animals defending their territory. When NIGMA forces tried to advance down the main road into town, they found it blocked by overturned farming equipment. When they tried to go around, they discovered that every irrigation tunnel had been turned into a defensive position. When they brought up heavy weapons to blast through the obstacles, human fighters would appear from hidden positions, attack with improvised weapons, and then disappear back into tunnel systems that seemed to connect every building in the colony. The worst part was that the humans never seemed to run out of ways to hurt his soldiers. They used farm chemicals as poison gas. They turned tractors into mobile bombs. They even weaponized the planet's own agriculture, using the knowledge of local plants and animals to create traps that Zeknor's soldiers couldn't have imagined. By the end of the first day, the NIGMA forces had advanced exactly 3 kilometers into the colony, and they had lost over 800 soldiers doing it. Sir, his ground commander reported, these humans are unusual. They're not fighting like any species we've encountered before. Explain, Zeknor demanded. They don't seem to care about preserving their own forces. They make attacks that any rational military would consider suicide. But they do them in ways that cause maximum damage to us. And they know this terrain better than we know our own ships. Zeknor studied the battlefield reports. His forces had every advantage: better weapons, better armor, air support, orbital bombardment capability. But somehow, the humans were making. Every meter cost his forces dearly. Double the ground forces, he ordered. 6,000 soldiers should be more than enough to handle 30,000 farmers. The second wave landed the next morning. By evening, Zeknor had lost another 1,000 soldiers and gained exactly 1 kilometer of ground. On the third day, he committed his entire ground force, nearly 10,000 elite troops with full air support. Governor Mitchell watched the battle from her command bunker, buried deep beneath what used to be the colony's main grain elevator. Around her, farmers and retired soldiers coordinated defenses using communication systems built from farm equipment. "They're throwing everything they have at us," reported Webb, who was commanding the southern defensive sector. "How long can we hold?" Mitchell asked. "As long as we have to," Webb replied simply. These people didn't come to Kepler 442b to live easy lives. They came here because they wanted to build something worth defending. Above them, Admiral Zeknor was beginning to understand what Captain Chen had tried to warn the NIGMA Empire about. These weren't just farmers. These were humans who had chosen to make their lives on a world where the weather could kill them, where growing food meant fighting the planet itself, where survival required the kind of determination that most species couldn't even imagine. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting because that's what humans did. By the end of the third day, the NIGMA 7th Fleet had lost 60% of its ground forces and controlled less than 5% of the colony. Admiral Zeknor faced a choice he had never had to make in 40 years of military service. He could continue the assault and eventually win through sheer numbers, but it would cost him his entire fleet. Or he could retreat and admit that 30,000 human farmers had defeated the pride of the NIGMA Empire. As he struggled with the decision, his communication officer reported an incoming message from NIGMA High Command. "Admiral, the 3rd and 12th Fleets are being dispatched to assist you. The Supreme Chancellor wants this human problem resolved permanently." Zeknor looked down at the planet where his soldiers were still dying and realized that the NIGMA Empire had just made the same mistake he had. They still didn't understand what they were fighting. Supreme Chancellor Vexthara stood before the NIGMA High Council, her silver skin pale with rage. The holographic display showed the current status of the Kepler 442b operation: 60% casualties, minimal territorial gains, and a complete failure to achieve any strategic objectives. "Explain to me," she said, her voice like ice cutting through steel, "how 30,000 primitive farmers have held off the 7th Fleet for 3 days. Admiral Zeknor's image flickered in the communication display. His usually perfect uniform was stained, and one of his arms was in a medical brace from a human attack on his command shuttle. "Chancellor, these humans are not fighting like any species we've encountered. They seem to have no concept of acceptable losses. They make attacks that should be impossible, using weapons and tactics that violate every principle of civilized warfare." "They're farmers," Council member Dextar interrupted. "How dangerous can farmers be?" "These farmers," Zeknor replied grimly, "just turned their irrigation system into a weapons delivery network. They're using agricultural chemicals as chemical weapons. They've converted farm equipment into mobile artillery, and they know every centimeter of their territory like it was their own body." Vexthara turned to her military advisors. "What is the status of reinforcements?" "The 3rd and 12th Fleets are en route," reported Fleet Admiral Morgoth. 240 ships total. Even if every human on that planet is a warrior, we'll overwhelm them through sheer numbers." "Good. And what of the other human colonies?" "Intelligence reports show increased activity across all human territories. They appear to be implementing some kind of defensive protocol, but we estimate their entire military consists of fewer than 1,000 ships. Our combined fleets will outnumber them 300 to 1. Vexithara nodded with satisfaction. "Then, we end this now. Send word to all fleet commanders the human problem is to be resolved completely. No prisoners, no negotiations, no mercy. If they want to fight like animals, we'll treat them like animals." What the NIGMA Empire didn't know was that human intelligence had been monitoring their communications since the first survey ships had appeared. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the main briefing room of Earth Command, watching Admiral Wells and General Martinez coordinate humanity's response. "They're bringing everything they have," Admiral Wells reported. "Nearly 300 ships, including some of the largest dreadnoughts in their fleet. They're not just trying to conquer us anymore. They want to wipe us out completely." "What's our response capability?" Chen asked. "The official response is what they'd expect," General Martinez replied. "We have 800 ships scattered across human space, mostly small patrol vessels and cargo haulers with weapons bolted on. On paper, we shouldn't last more than a few hours." "And unofficially?" Martinez smiled grimly. "Unofficially, we've been preparing for this exact scenario since the first day humans left Earth. Every cargo ship has a hidden weapon system. Every civilian transport has been designed to convert into a combat vessel in under 6 hours. Every mining station, every orbital platform, every piece of space infrastructure we've built has been designed with one purpose in mind. Which is? To make anyone who attacks humanity pay such a terrible price that they'll never want to try it again." Chen nodded slowly. Earth's leaders had learned from history. Humanity had always been at its most dangerous when its survival was threatened, and they had spent decades making sure that lesson would apply in space as well. "What about Kepler 442b? Governor Mitchell reports they can hold for another week, maybe 2, Wells replied. "But the real battle won't be there. It'll be here when they come for Earth itself." The NIGMA 3rd and 12th fleets arrived at Kepler 442b 6 days later, just as Admiral Zeknor was preparing to withdraw the surviving elements of the 7th Fleet. The combined force now included nearly 300 ships and almost 50,000 ground troops. Admiral Morgoth took overall command and immediately ordered a complete orbital bombardment of the human colony. "No more ground assault," he announced. "We glass the planet from orbit and move on to the next target." But when the bombardment began, the NIGMA forces discovered that the humans had been busy during the week-long siege. Hidden defensive systems across the planet began firing back. Improvised surface-to-space missiles built from mining equipment, orbital defense platforms that had been camouflaged as communication satellites, and weapon systems that shouldn't have been possible to build with colonial-level technology. More importantly, the bombardment revealed something that changed everything. There were human ships in the system. They materialized out of what had seemed like empty space. Dozens of vessels that had been hiding in the asteroid belt, using stealth systems and careful positioning to avoid detection. They weren't large ships and they didn't have the advanced weapons of the NIGMA fleet, but they fought with a ferocity that shocked the alien commanders. Captain Lisa Park commanded the UES Defiance, a converted cargo hauler that had been retrofitted, with the most powerful engines and weapons Earth could provide. As she led her small squadron in an attack run against a NIGMA dreadnought, she opened communications to her crew. "Remember," she said calmly, "we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to hurt them so badly that they'll think twice before attacking another human world." What followed was a type of combat that the NIGMA Empire had never experienced. Human ships made attack runs that no rational military would attempt. Ramming maneuvers against vessels 10 times their size, suicide attacks designed to damage critical systems, and coordinated strikes that ignored every principle of fleet preservation. The UES Courage, commanded by Captain Wang, deliberately rammed his ship into the engine section of a NIGMA cruiser. The explosion destroyed both vessels, but it also took out 2 other alien ships that were too close to the blast. The UES Determination, under Captain Rodriguez, used her ship's cargo bay, designed for carrying mining equipment, to launch a swarm of improvised missiles directly into the bridge of a NIGMA battleship. Admiral Morgoth watched in horror as his fleet began taking casualties from an enemy that should have been helpless against his superior technology. "They're insane," his tactical officer reported. "They're deliberately sacrificing their ships to damage ours." "How many vessels have we lost?" 47 ships destroyed, another 62 with major damage. We're losing 3 ships for every human vessel we destroy." Morgoth stared at the tactical display in disbelief. By all military logic, his fleet should have won this battle in minutes. Instead, he was being bled to death by an enemy that fought like they had nothing left to lose. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from one of the human ships." The image that appeared on the main screen was Captain Sarah Chen, now wearing the uniform of a fleet commander. Behind her, the bridge of her ship showed the organized chaos of a vessel in combat. "Admiral Morgoth," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the battle noise. "This is Captain Chen of the United Earth Forces. I want you to understand something very clearly. This is what happens when you threaten human worlds. This is what happens when you ignore our warnings. And this is just the beginning." "Human," Morgoth replied. "You cannot possibly believe you can defeat the combined might of 3 NIGMA fleets." Chen smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Admiral, we don't have to defeat you. We just have to make you understand that every human world you attack will cost you more ships than you can afford to lose. Every human colony you threaten will fight back with everything we have, and every time you ignore our warnings, we'll make you pay a price that your empire can't survive." Behind her, the tactical display showed the human fleet engaging the NIGMA vessels in a running battle that was slowly but systematically destroying both forces. "You see," Chen continued, "you made one critical mistake. You assumed that because we wanted peace, we were weak. You assumed that because we were small, we were helpless. But we're the species that survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts. We're the species that turned the most dangerous world in this region of space into a garden, and we're the species that's about to teach the galaxy what happens when you threaten human children." The transmission ended, and Admiral Morgoth realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a battle for one colony world. This was the beginning of a war that could destroy the NIGMA Empire, and the humans were just getting started. The final battle began when the remnants of 3 NIGMA fleets limped into the Sol system, following what they thought was a desperate human retreat. Admiral Morgoth had lost over half his ships at Kepler 442b, but he still commanded 90 vessels, more than enough to destroy Earth's defenses and end human resistance forever. What he found waiting for him changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, voice shaking, "I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. The asteroid belt it's full of weapons platforms." Morgoth stared at the tactical display in disbelief. What had looked like a normal system on long-range scans was revealing itself to be the most heavily fortified location he had ever seen. Weapons platforms disguised as asteroids, defense stations hidden in the shadows of planets, missile launchers built into the rings of Saturn itself. "How many platforms?" he asked. "I count over 3,000 individual installations, sir, and there are ships, hundreds of them, emerging from concealment throughout the system." Captain Sarah Chen's voice cut through the communication channel, broadcasting from the bridge of the UES Defiance. Her ship hung in space between the NIGMA fleet and Earth, looking tiny compared to the alien dreadnoughts. "Admiral Morgoth," she said, her voice calm and professional. "Welcome to Sol. This is your final warning. Turn around and leave now, or discover why Earth is still here after 4.5 billion years of things trying to destroy it." Morgoth felt a flash of his old confidence. Humans were clever, he'd give them that, but they were still primitives, playing with weapons they barely understood. "Captain Chen, you have delayed the inevitable long enough. Surrender now, and I will grant your species a quick death." Chen's laugh was soft, almost sad. "Admiral, you still don't understand. We tried to warn you. We tried to tell you what would happen if you threatened our homes. You dismissed us as primitives. You ignored our boundaries. You attacked our children." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of an entire species' determination. "Now you get to learn what 4 billion years of evolution on a death world actually produces." The battle that followed became known in galactic history as the Sol Massacre, though no human ever called it that. To humanity, it was simply the day they proved that their warnings had not been empty threats. The NIGMA fleet found itself fighting not just human ships, but the solar system itself. Automated defense platforms opened fire from every planet, every moon, every major asteroid. The gas giants launched clouds of hunter-killer drones that had been waiting in their atmospheres for decades. Even the sun seemed to be weaponized, as massive solar collectors redirected stellar energy into focused beams that could cut through alien armor like paper. But the real shock came from the human ships themselves. What Admiral Morgoth had taken for a small defensive fleet was actually the largest concentration of human military power ever assembled. Vessels that had been disguised as cargo haulers dropped their camouflage to reveal advanced weapon systems. Mining ships opened hidden bays to launch swarms of fighters. Even civilian transports joined the battle, ramming NIGMA vessels with the kind of desperate courage that the aliens couldn't comprehend. Captain Rodriguez of the UES Indomitable led his squadron in a direct assault on the NIGMA flagship. His ship, a converted asteroid miner, shouldn't have been able to threaten a dreadnought that outmassed it 50-1, but as his vessel closed to ramming distance, Rodriguez opened a communication channel. "This is for every human child you tried to murder," he said simply, and drove his ship directly into the alien vessel's reactor core. The explosion lit up half the solar system and took 3 NIGMA ships with it. Admiral Morgoth watched his fleet disintegrate around him and finally began to understand what the humans had been trying to tell them. This wasn't just military resistance. This was an entire species that had decided the NIGMA Empire needed to be stopped, regardless of the cost. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we've lost 70% of the fleet. Remaining ships are requesting permission to retreat." "Denied," Morgoth snarled. "We finish this now, or the Empire will never recover from the shame." But as he spoke, new contacts began appearing on sensors. Human reinforcements were arriving from across their territory, not just military vessels but civilian ships, cargo haulers, mining platforms, anything that could mount a weapon and make the journey to Earth. The captain of a human hospital ship, the UES Mercy, opened communications as she positioned her vessel between a damaged human destroyer and a NIGMA cruiser. "NIGMA vessel," Dr. Sarah Kim announced calmly. "You are fired upon a medical facility. I am required to inform you that this ship is protected under interstellar law." "Human doctor," the alien captain replied. "You are in a combat zone. Withdraw immediately." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Dr. Kim replied. "There are wounded humans aboard that destroyer, and I have a duty to protect my patients." The NIGMA cruiser opened fire on the hospital ship. The Mercy's shields held for exactly 30 seconds before failing, and the ship began to break apart under the alien weapons. What happened next became legend throughout human space. Every human ship in the system, military, civilian, cargo, mining, passenger, turned toward that NIGMA cruiser. They came from every direction, ignoring the other alien vessels, focusing all their rage on the ship that had destroyed a hospital. The cruiser lasted less than 5 minutes. Admiral Morgoth realized that he was fighting an enemy that didn't just defend their territory or their government. They defended each other. Every human loss made the rest fight harder, not weaker. Every act of cruelty by his forces was answered with a fury that defied all military logic. "Sir," his communication officer called out, "Supreme Chancellor Vexithara is requesting a status report." Morgoth looked around his damaged bridge. Through the viewscreen he could see the scattered remains of what had once been the pride of the NIGMA fleet. 15 ships remained operational out of the 90 he had brought to Sol, and they were surrounded by hundreds of human vessels that showed no sign of backing down. "Tell the Chancellor," he said quietly, "that the human problem is worse than we thought." Captain Chen's image appeared on his screen one final time. Behind her, the bridge of the Defiance showed signs of battle damage, but her crew was still at their stations, still fighting. "Admiral," she said, "this ends now. You can surrender what's left of your fleet, or we can finish this fight. Either way, you're not leaving the system with the ability to threaten human worlds ever again." For the first time in his military career, Admiral Morgoth considered surrender. Not because he was outgunned, though he was, but because he finally understood what Captain Chen had tried to warn them about months ago. Humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to protect something precious to them, And they would pay any price to do it. "Captain Chen," he said finally, I surrender my remaining forces." 2 hours later, Supreme Chancellor Vexithara sat in her private chambers aboard the NIGMA capital station, reading Admiral Morgoth's final report. 3 fleets destroyed, over 200 ships lost, and word was already spreading throughout NIGMA space that the mighty empire had been defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitives. Worse, other species that had been conquered by the NIGMA were beginning to rebel. If humans could defeat the empire, maybe they could too. A soft chime announced an incoming communication. Captain Chen's image appeared on the holographic display, and Vexithara was struck by how tired the human looked. This war had cost her people dearly as well. "Chancellor," Chen said formally, "I believe we need to talk." "What terms do you demand for our surrender?" Vexithara asked bitterly. Chen shook her head. "We don't want your surrender. We never wanted to fight you at all. We warned you that this would happen if you ignored our boundaries. We told you what the cost would be if you threatened our people. You chose not to listen. Then what do you want?" "The same thing we wanted 6 months ago," Chen replied simply. "Peace, trade, mutual respect, and a promise that you'll never again mistake our desire for peace as a sign of weakness." Vexithara stared at the human in amazement. After everything that had happened, after the destruction of 3 fleets, they still wanted peace? "The NIGMA Empire has lost face throughout the galaxy," she said. "Other species are rebelling, our control is breaking down. Then maybe it's time for the NIGMA Empire to become something better," Chen suggested. "A confederation of equals instead of an empire of subjects. A community of species working together instead of one species dominating all the others." "You think we can change so easily?" Chen smiled, and for the first time in months it was a genuinely warm expression. "Chancellor, we're the species that survived everything our planet could throw at us, and we learned to work together to do it. If we can change, anyone can." The peace treaty was signed 3 weeks later. The NIGMA Empire officially dissolved, replaced by the Galactic Confederation, a voluntary alliance of species working together for mutual protection and benefit. Captain Sarah Chen was promoted to Admiral and placed in charge of the new Confederation Defense Force. Her first official act was to establish a joint training program where human military officers would teach other to be